All right, guys, I'm back. I'm gonna make this one short. I didn't realize the other one was that long, and I want to make sure I can keep your attention. So I want to talk about separate issues here and there. So this video is gonna be shorter, like I said, and we'll talk about our leaders in America, specifically our African American perceived. Well, they're African American, so our leaders, our civil rights activists, our social activists that are in the front line, the ones that we see on the news when things happen. So what is the difference between peaceful or non-peaceful protests in 2014 and what happened with Martin Luther King? Martin Luther King Jr. was a lot different from what's going on today because Martin Luther King Jr., first of all, was an educated African American male with credentials that used that to serve the African American community. Obviously, the world was a lot different at that point, and we were suffering a lot more injustices. But do not believe for a second that we have won the battle and that things are okay now. Oppression and racism are just less open and prevalent and in your face. It happens and it's going on behind the scenes, and it is systematic. It is embedded in this country, but it's not as in your face as it was then, and that's the difference. And so, again, Martin Luther King is different because in his day, you had leaders that were on the front line. Martin Luther King Jr. was maced. He was there right next to people who were getting beat. He went to jail on numerous occasions. He was there. And today we have leaders that are older, because we still have a lot of people from that era that are active, and we have younger people as well. But they are living cushier lives, and they're less likely to put themselves on the line. They'll be there and say they were there. And this is my opinion again, and I would like you to put input on it, but they'll go when stuff is cool and when it's safe, but they're not going to be there getting maced. They're not going to be there getting hit with rubber bullets. They're not going to be there when stuff is really going down. And that's what Martin Luther King Jr. did, and that's why he was more effective. Our leaders show up for appearances. They'll speak and they'll say things on social media because somebody taught them how to work Twitter or whatever. But when it goes down, they're not there. And that's the difference. People, for the most part, I would never overgeneralize and say everybody, but people participate to further their own careers. Like, people have a huge focus on their careers and what they had to do to say that they were a part of it, to look back like, yeah, I went to Ferguson and I did hands up, don't shoot, but they get back on their private jets and they take their butts home. They are not there like you were there. Okay. And that's the difference. And so that's a part of the reason why I feel like we're not as successful in these endeavors as we were at one point in history. Another thing is that people fail to connect with these victims because it's not them. Now, Martin Luther King Jr., in his day, there was input from other races, there was input from other leaders from different places, and they all took part. They all put in on this because they understood that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's Martin Luther King's quote. When children are getting gunned down in the street, when anything is happening in this country that is an injustice, it affects you. The kid might not look like you. The kid might not have the same background as you, or the person, whoever it is, you should be enraged because this is your country and it still affects you. Because if it can happen to them, it can happen to you. Understand that. We need, for some reason, and it's so sad because we live in a world where we're able to connect with each other much more than in any other history in time. And the media played a part in Martin Luther King Jr.'s success and enacting change because he was able to show the world what was going on. And we have that at a much more graphic scale. And maybe the desensitized to what this violence and things that are going on because we see it so much now and it's not new to us and we don't react the same way they did then. But at the same time, we are able to access the information. We're able to see what's going on. It's not being kept from us, and people are not responding in the same way. We need a real connect to the victims by other communities. And I don't mean just Facebook and Twitter activists. And I've talked with some of my classmates who are in different fields than me, and we talked about people, the generation, the interest that is pulled from Facebook and Twitter, and how people are informed by it, and people make quotes, and they say things, and I think that that is important. I think that it's important to use those platforms to continue to let the world know what's going on, and to speak about it, and to get younger people interested in it, and to have their part in it, because they're the ones that are going to enact change today, not people that were active in the 60s that are now living in mansions and their kids all have Ivy League degrees. Like we need people like us that are young, and people who are in the forefront, and people who are there, who are educated as well, and that can change. And so the Facebook and Twitter thing is a plus in the minds, because you have people who are informed about it, and people who you do generate real discussion. You also generate real piss poor racist comments, but people care today and forget tomorrow. And that's the difference between being there and being active and doing something versus posting a Facebook status, or putting a picture up on Instagram with hands up, don't shoot, or putting your Trayvon Martin hood on. Because tomorrow, do you still care? That's the difference. And what that shows people is that people care right now. But I mean, next week they'll be on to the next thing. They'll be on to Kim Kardashian's butt picture. It's just another. It's seen as just another passing fad. That's what it's seen as, and so that's why it's not as successful, and that's why it's not enacting much change, because it's not really doing anything. It's important, but it's not really doing anything, and that's what it is. That's my opinion. If you feel differently, please quote. I'm happy to discuss it. I want to talk a little bit about the Watts riots and history, and I want to talk about the perceived black elite and how we need their input to help enact change. So, to talk a little bit about the Watts riots, and I'm going to screen share it to you so you can see one of my favorite quotes by Martin Luther King while I'm talking. So the Watts riots, which raged for 6 days and resulted in more than $40 million worth of property damage, was both the largest and costliest urban rebellion of the civil rights era. The riot spurred from an incident on August 11, 1965, and that's around the same time of year. It's very interesting how history repeats itself. A young African-American motorist was pulled over and arrested by a white police officer for suspension of driving while intoxicated. A crowd gathered in the scene, and it started tensions between police officers and the crowd, erupted in a violent exchange. The outbreak of violence that followed Fraud's arrest immediately touched off a large-scale riot centered in the commercial section of Watts, a deeply impoverished African-American neighborhood in South Central Los Angeles. For several days, rioters overturned and burned automobiles, looted and damaged grocery stores, liquor stores, department stores, and pawn shops. Sound familiar, doesn't it? Over the course of the 6-day riot, over 14,000 California National Guard troops, again, very, very interested, were mobilized in South Central Los Angeles in a curfew zone, encompassed over 45 miles of established. All told, the rioting claimed the lives of 34 people and resulted in more than 1,000 injuries. So there was a lot of discussion. Again, it just made the news, but it stemmed from the community's longstanding grievances, which is what this is. People have to understand that this is not just about Mike Brown. It's not just about what happened. It is about it happening over and over and over again, and people getting away with killing people. Black lives do matter, to quote the hashtag that I do think is important. And this is the straw that broke the camel's back for the most part. That's what it is. So you can put focus on what Mike Brown did, and you can do whatever you want to do. But at the end of the day, we're not just mad about Mike Brown. We're mad about this happening continuously. The important thing to understand is despite the reported findings of the Gubernatorial Commission followed the riot, city leaders and state officials failed to implement measures to improve the social and economic conditions of African Americans living in Watts neighborhood. So it didn't make a huge difference. That shows you that violent protest and looting and rioting does not work. It does garnish attention. It does. And we need to continue to have attention on it and not forget. But we know the outcome from, Martin Luther King's peaceful protests and the marches and things like that. We know that did enact change. We learn about our future from our past. So one thing we have to understand is that burning these buildings and doing all that stuff didn't work that time, and it's not going to work now. So we have to think of different ways to enact change, and it's not that. So I understand that people are angry. I understand people feel like they don't have a voice. I understand that people feel like this is all they can do. Like this is what we have to do something. So I understand that, but I'm here to talk about ways to do things in other ways and how we can all work little by little to enact change. So I'll be back and talk more about that.